Good evening. It's Will McGarvey at Solano Pride Center, and we're so grateful to be able to bring a special book, Grand Love by Janna Barkin. The subtitle is Stories for Grandparents of Transgender Grandchildren. An important book, I think, especially for folks in our community, to be able to help folks that might be connected with their trans grandkids quite closely, and others that may live further away from their grandkids. We in centers might be serving both the transgender child and the grandparents and the parents in different ways through our mental health counseling and case management and other different ways. But there's some great stories in here that our friend Janna Barkin from Marin has for us, and sharing a wealth of knowledge and relationships. We're just we've been talking about doing this for some time, Janna. I'm glad that we were able to come together, and but we definitely want to spotlight you tonight and hear more about not only this book, your other previous book, which the title was, no, I'm blanking on it here,
It's
but can you
called
remind
He's
me?
Always Been My Son, a mother's story about raising her transgender son.
Perfect. And so take it away. Can't wait to learn more with you tonight, and we'll have some more questions when you're done with your presentation.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to share a presentation with y'all and let's get started. All right. So, as you can see, this is the cover of the book, A Grand Love Stories for Grandparents of Transgender Grandchildren. And those grandchildren can be any age, right? So, we're not just talking about youth. And as we begin, I want to center this discussion of gender. Discussions of gender and gender diversity are everywhere these days, and concepts around gender and the language of gender are being discussed even as new terms are being created. And it is okay if you or someone else you know is struggling to figure out what it all means. You are definitely not alone if you're confused, if this is new to you. This is a safe place to ask questions. And for those who are watching back on the recording, you can always get in touch with me via my website, which you can see on the screen, and also contacting the folks that are so graciously hosting me. Thank you, Will and Christina. If you have questions, we can always do our best to get answers to you if you're not with us live tonight. Why are we focusing on gender when there's so many parts of being a human, right? I often say that the fact that my son is transgender is one of the least interesting things about him. But it is true that gender impacts all people. We all have some relationship to gender, whether it's that we feel the same gender as we were labeled at birth, or we might feel differently, or we might not have a concept of our own gender. Still, gender impacts us all, especially the way society categorizes people with regard to gender. These talks are focused on disrupting discrimination and harassment. The work that I do as a cisgender straight woman is to do my best to be an ally, to stand up for people that may not have the privilege that I do in this culture that we're in. Working to increase legal protections will benefit everyone, not just transgender people. There is an increasing recognition of gender diversity, whether some people agree with that or not. More and more, we as a collective humanity are growing in our understanding of just what gender can mean in our human way of being, right? Gender diversity. There's not only two ways male, female. Transgender and non-binary and gender-expansive youth and adult often face family rejection. And perhaps that is one of my main purposes, my main motivators, knowing that there are people that are being kicked out of their homes, that are being made to feel unsafe, so they leave their homes. And what's interesting is we know through studies, Trevor Project just came out with a wonderful study recently, a survey looking at the lives of thousands of trans people. And unfortunately, there's a higher incident right now of mental health challenges, emotional health challenges. And we know through studies that one of the most protective things a trans person can have in their lives is family acceptance. In fact, it's the number one protective factor that we can see. There's others, but having family acceptance is such a key to well-being for all people. But my focus is on transgender, children of all ages, grandchildren of all ages, and being a bridge toward that acceptance. And in this book, A Grand Love, I chose to focus specifically on grandparents and the relationship grandparents might have with their transgender grandchildren. So my focus on grandparents started in 2020 at the height of the pandemic, when I could tell my mom was feeling really isolated, and she was doing really well on Zoom, and she's always been a teacher. Came to acceptance very quickly with my child inviting us in to his experience being trans and wanting to take steps toward transition. And her being a teacher and also being an ally, it felt like a natural that she could help me start this group. And so in 2020, we did start a group called A Grand Love, or I think we didn't have a yet. We just called it Grand Love. And many of the grandparents in that group talked about feeling isolated themselves. They didn't have many peers that had any understanding about what their grandchild was going through, but also about what they themselves were going through. And grandparents have such an important role in families. They can play a very crucial role in family dynamics. And of course, the parent in between the grandchild and the grandparent can also have a challenging position in being the go-between. So perhaps focusing on grandparents and how grandparents can love and support their grandchildren, their love and acceptance and understanding can play a huge role in the flourishing of their trans grandchild. And sometimes the grandparents are even the first to come to that immediate acceptance. When I do these talks, though I know many of us are versed in the differences here between gender and sexuality, it's common that grandparents conflate these two different subjects. So going into a little bit of that gender 101, we could call it. Gender is a construct that actually has three components. It could even have more, but we could talk about one's body with regard to gender, one's social experiences, both inner and outer with regard to gender, and also one's identity. And the identity, I think, is the most difficult to understand. It's this mind within oneself that really only one can experience for themselves. And sometimes the words to describe what that one person might be feeling inside are difficult to show on the outside. So we say someone's inner knowing of who they are with regard to gender is gender identity. The social gender could be expressed in clothing, in names, in pronouns, in the way one does certain activities, in the way they even carry themselves or their voice. But it's not always obvious what someone's inner gender identity is by the way they behave or are read by others socially. And the same with body. Yes, we could give someone a label, uh, and we do that determined from their outer body parts, but we know it's so much more complex than just a binary of a vagina and a penis. There are many ways to be a human. There are people who are born with ambiguous genitalia. Perhaps they could be called an intersex person. They might call themselves that. The reason why I say that is because even though a label might be defined as such, it might not be the right label that someone takes, right? So just giving that room for, yes, if a person's born with ambiguous genitalia, that could be defined as intersex, but only if that works for them. And also, bodies can be very diverse with regard to chromosomes and DNA and hormones and hormone receptors and how these all interact. And so, gender not being just what someone shows on the outside, but has these main components. And this is opposed to sexuality, which is a completely different thing. And as I said, can be often conflated, especially by grandparents. And sexuality refers to, how we are in attraction. Am I attracted to other people? And how am I attracted to other people? And to whom am I attracted? And who I would want to be in a relationship with. And these can be very varied as well, not just a heteronormative way of being. There are many ways to be attracted to someone. Some people are not attracted sexually unless they have an emotional connection. This is just one example. Whereas other people describe, oh, I don't need any emotional connection. I'm either sexually attracted or not, right? So a lot of variety, a lot of variance, all normal. Gender isn't a binary of just male or female, something that exists as one or the other, just two choices. It's not a choice. It's a choice to take steps to be affirming one's true self. But one could say trans people are born this way. Biological traits, it's not based on biological traits, though that can be part of it. And it's not usually outwardly obvious. And sexuality is also not a binary of just being gay or straight, and there's nothing in between. That's not true. It's not a choice, and it's not only about someone's prior relationships or history of dating or the labels they've chosen or not chosen or sexual attraction. There's many, many ways to describe and to experience sexuality.
Janna, I've seen people try to think of this as spectrums kind of in a linear way.
Hmm?
And the more I've been thinking about it, the more it's like it includes more than just a spectrum. It's more like a it's more like a oval
Yes.
over a part
Also,
of a larger circle or square that would
mm,
include all of who we might be on different
mm,
parts of a spectrum that might be have an X and a Y axis, not just a
mm.
one line.
Yes, thank you for that visual. And I've also heard it described as a sphere. So being more dimensions, not flat like on
Oh,
a paper,
I like that too,
sphere, or
even
even
better.
universe, or even many universes. I think that it's very expansive, right? We hear sometimes the word gender expansiveness, gender diversity, just like humanness is so difficult really to describe and define. These parts of being human are difficult to describe and define, but we're trying, right? And I love when we can have discussion about, the possibilities. I'm a possibility person. So thank you for that thought.
Well, and then each person's spectrum would be unique for them, even if
Mm,
someone might have one or two points of similarity with another person, the intersectionality of all of what it means for them would be unique for who they are.
Absolutely. And I also like that you brought up intersectionality. Intersectionality having to do with the different parts of oneself that might be part of, well, there's many different ways to look at identity, right? Racial identity, socioeconomic status, religion, communities we live in, education levels, etc., right? We could go on. And all of these different layers are the parts of who we are. And when one person might have a layer or a part of them that is also part of marginalized community, example being LGBTQ, does everyone LGBTQ experience marginalization? Not necessarily, but in society as a whole, yes. And when we see these different things, if someone, for example, is a person of color and also part of the LGBTQ community, that's intersectionality, when there's layers or intersections that might be part of the non-dominant culture. It can have added challenges by sharing those intersections, but it can also be added connections, as you were just describing. If I find someone who might have some of the same similar things in their whole description of their identity, wow, that could be very powerful to find someone that has some of the same intersectionality, to find that common thread, even when we feel unique, which we are. We talked about gender having the three components, the body and the social and the identity. And when these all fit together in a way that feels aligned, we could describe someone's gender as cisgender. The body and the label they got because of their body and their social identity and their inner gender identity align, are congruent, feel like they work. That is cisgender. Cis is Latin for same. And when these three don't feel congruent in some way for the individual, they, especially a person who does not feel that the assignment they were given at birth based on their body aligns with their inner understanding of self, their gender identity, when that does not feel congruent, that person might call themselves transgender. It's a working definition, someone who does not identify as their sex assigned at birth. Does this definition work for everyone? No. Are there other ways to say it? Yes. Do I give a person a label because of my assumptions? No. These labels are for people to understand and take their words for themselves. There are so many other ways of being a human and words that have come up along the way. These are just a few of the many we can find if we Google even different gender identities. The books that I write have glossaries, and they're based on a few different sources, Google being one of them, the Google Dictionary, but also the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, and also books that I've read written by trans people. And the words are often shifting. So if there's a word here that you don't know, I would suggest taking it with you and looking for some information on it. And a great place to start could be one of my books, but also there's so many good sources out there. And
We have a terminology sheet that we update on
you
a regular
do.
basis, and we're on our 6th version since I started just under 2 years ago.
Wow, isn't that amazing? That really
Because
tells
language
us.
changes so rapidly, and people are using new terminology for themselves as
Yes.
well.
So that's great to know that y'all have that. And if you are looking for that type of information, a glossary, a guide, definitely contact the center. All right, so like Will was describing before, can we visualize this gender spectrum? Could we see this spectrum as being many dimensional, right? Could it be that some people feel they don't even fit into the spectrum we're describing, and some people feel really comfortable in that? So expanding is really what we're thinking of, not just a binary, not just one or the other, but many myriad of possibilities. And I do like this color image because even as you look at the colors, you can see where they're blending and blurring, and they're just not straight lines of this is how it is. And I really love that, even though I really fit the cisgender heteronormative boxes in a lot of ways. I really love knowing that I am part of a spectrum, and that I'm individual, but I'm also part of the myriad of possibilities of how you can be. And we know not only are there a lot of terms for gender, but also there's a lot of new pronouns. And there's pronouns we're used to, she, her, and he, him, but there's also they, them, a gender neutral pronoun. There is sie, zir, another gender neutral pronoun, sie, them, another gender neutral. And there's also people who prefer no pronouns. Please only use my name, someone might say. And some people are comfortable with any and all pronouns. Some people use a combination, she, they. It can be confusing. It can also be helpful to practice, 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 right? And just like learning anything new, we might not get it on the first try. In my new book, A Grand Love, there are helpful hints for learning how to adapt. Concrete exercises you can do to learn how to use pronouns, to get used to the pronouns, to get your brain to form new patterns so that you can use someone's correct pronouns, because really it's based on respect. I would not want to call Will a different name because I know that Will told me his name is Will. And anyone who tells me they have a different name, I will do my best to respect that. It is their choice. The same with pronouns. Pronouns take the place of someone's name. And still in our culture, in our community, in our language, pronouns are very important, and they are gendered. In other languages, they are not gendered. The pronouns are not gendered. And
It's
that,
not just an English thing. It's SNL had a skit on this about the
yes,
gendered languages of Spanish and why there are
yes,
so many irregular verbs and
yes,
even incongruities between what the language calls a feminine, like la mesa,
yes.
versus other masculine objects.
Yes, so it can be even more confusing when we get into the Romance languages, we get into languages that don't use gendered pronouns, and not really being able to grasp why it's so important in English that we use these correct pronouns when their language does not even have gendered pronouns, right? So yes, so it's really complex, and this is where intersectionality comes in, and cultural humility, and also cultural sensitivity, right? And understanding that not everyone's just going to figure this out, and it won't be natural for everyone. And then for others, it's like, well, I don't know, it doesn't really affect them because they never had a different idea anyway. So learning English, they can learn that it's a person's purview to be able to name their own pronouns. So in wanting to respect someone, these are just some of the ideas. And I'm just going to talk about a couple of them, and perhaps people can pause the video if they want to learn more about these, think more about these. But it's really something that, like I said, if we practice, we can really adapt quite easily. When we talk about the person, speak fondly and use their correct pronouns. And you can think about them too. You can think about what the person might be doing and say to yourself, well, oh, my grandchild, they are doing this today, or my grandchild, he is doing this today. You can update the contacts in your phone with new names and even write their pronouns in there. And, remember sentences on the chalkboard and repeating them over and over and over? Well, those do help. It depends on the way people learn, right? And if you write with your non-dominant hand, that's a really, really great way of shifting the brain. Also, writing a letter or a story about the person or to the person and really using their correct pronouns. And best, you can practice with a friend. I had a grandma tell her that she asked all her friends to correct her if they ever hear her using the wrong pronoun for her grandchild. And her friends are correcting her, and she's thanking them for correcting. And so she's not only learning and doing her best, but she's inviting in her community, which is just wonderful. So she's getting the support she needs too. And you might have some good ideas too, those of you who are out there.
But that helps her friends know how to
That's
refer
right.
to her grandchild as well.
That's right. She's reinforcing it with them as well. It's wonderful. And,
That's lovely.
often when it's not our own grandchild or our own child, it's easier. It's like I have a lot of families that say, I have trans friends, and they do. And they had no problem. And there's just something about your own child or your own grandchild. There's many layers in what makes it challenging. But sometimes even with full acceptance, the pronoun change, the name change is tricky because our brains are wired, and especially with grandparents. I mean, I think that grandparents are wonderful lifelong learners, and at the same time, it might take a little longer to change patterns, right? So practice, and if you make mistakes, you can just apologize and move on. You don't have to, wear down the conversation, just apologize and move on. And, don't expect patience from your person, especially if they're a teenager. We would like everyone to be patient with us, but teenagers are not always very patient. And also, people who are experiencing gender dysphoria, before they really can affirm who they are and live their authentic life, it can be a very challenging time for them. And when we're not feeling great and we're feeling down or we're feeling anxious, we might not have a lot of room for holding space for other people's patience. It doesn't mean they don't love you. It just might mean that they really just don't have a lot of patience. But you can be patient with yourself, and I really encourage that. It doesn't mean just lollygag and not practice, but like this grandma that I just described is doing, she invited in friends so that she could give herself a break and not be so hard on herself, and really invite in others to help her and do our best to, once we apologize, just use the correct name and pronoun and move on and keep practicing.
Jana, I think one of the reasons why it's hard for some of us is because the first name our children are ever given is boy or girl.
Absolutely.
And it just gets so ingrained in our English brains that
Mm,
we know them as a boy or girl even before
yes.
their name. And as a new grandpa myself,
Oh,
who calls my granddaughter the Golden Girl because her name is Aurelia Golden,
yeah.
which is golden twice, once in Latin and once in English.
Well,
Um,
congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, the she, her is there. I remind myself that we'll learn what her gender is when she tells us.
Mhm.
She was assigned female at birth, and
Yeah,
she's a beautiful young lady.
yes,
But there is so much in our society that finds comfort in that
yes.
and gives us a way to kind of back up when we do forget the actual name we want to use for the person
Yeah.
who's among the most important person in our life.
Yeah. And there's a lot of focus, in the 90s, when we started to do a sonogram for every single pregnancy instead of using it only for at-risk pregnancies, people were really excited to know the gender of their babies. And you know what? For 98% of the population, it's going to fit. It's going to match, because as much as we would, some people would like to convince us that Oh, there's just so many trans people, and actually, our studies are still showing that we have about 1% of the population. Now, yes, youth might have a higher percentage-wise self-reporting this is. So there's some reasons why there might be more youth than adults that are reporting themselves as being trans or that are describing their identity as trans. So just to give it a perspective, 1% of the population, that's very high estimate. It's been up to now more like 5%. I mean, sorry, 0.5. But up to recently, that was about how many were estimated, and now that's higher. And it's not because all of a sudden humans are becoming transgender. It's that there's more awareness, that there's more possibility for people to know this about themselves, that they see it. They see trans people in society. They learn about being transgender as a variation of being human. And the younger parents get, the more of them are recognizing their young children sooner. So I think that's really interesting. And like you're describing, I mean, we are meant to categorize. I mean, this is how our human brain works. And it's a survival thing that we have developed. If we could discern who had the penis and who had the vagina, then we could make more babies. Okay, so that's true. And also, if we look back anthropologically, if we look back in nature, variations on that which I just described have existed and continue to exist. And like you also said, when families do go in transition, or when someone in the family transitions, the whole family can go through what we could call a transition as well. They might not be making any physical or legal changes, but there are certainly social changes. The words we use to describe, I mean, I describe my child, he's always been my son. Well, I didn't call him that for many years, for 14 years, even though to anyone who looked at him, he looked like a little boy. But I always said, oh, girls can be like this, because I let him have short hair and I let him have boys' clothes, what we call boys' clothes from the boys section. But they were the clothes he liked, and she at the time, and they were the clothes that my kid wanted to wear. And so I just stuck up for my kid as best I could and said, yeah, girls can be like this, until I found out I was wrong, that he wasn't a girl. So my words changed, and my mother then had to call what she thought, she had 2 grandchildren. Now she had a granddaughter and a grandson. Or for someone who has a non-binary sibling, excuse me, they're not going to use the word sister. They will use perhaps the word sibling. And these changes can take time to come through with our speech patterns, but also internally. Someone said to me today, I had a group earlier with grandparents, I think I'm finally starting to see my grandson as, and she said his name. And I thought, yes, this is when the pronouns are going to start shifting. As soon as we can really see this person, feel this person as their authentic self, the other adjustments can come along. And so sometimes people need time. And this is a story that I love to read about acceptance. This is from one of the grandparents. It's in the, or no, this story was written by a trans person. He's a young adult. And Eli writes about his grandfather and a word that his grandfather taught him. It's a Yiddish word, einikel. So the story goes like this. Due to generational differences, it sometimes can be particularly hard for grandparents to understand their grandchild's experience with gender. I was lucky enough to have grandparents who made an active effort to understand what I was experiencing by asking me questions and even attending an LGBTQ+ family support group. Eli says the approach they took was that although they might not ever be able to understand why I transitioned, they would support me regardless. Every supportive person in a trans person's life, especially for trans youth, makes a big difference. Respecting a person's preferred name and pronouns is a great place to start. Eli says, when I first came out to my grandparents and started transitioning, my grandpa taught me a Yiddish word, Einikel, which means grandchild and has no associated gender. Sharing this with me showed me, that he sees me for who I am, and that regardless of my gender, he will always love me first and foremost as his grandchild. This sums up one of the most important things that a trans kid needs to hear. Your value to me is not contingent upon your gender identity. And it just showed how, even without fully understanding, Grandpa understood a way to come toward Eli, and Eli could feel that. I really appreciate that story and appreciate Eli for sharing it with us. There are so many challenges that grandparents can experience that make it hard to come to that acceptance, the unfamiliarity with the subject, distance, as we've mentioned, generational differences, and adapting to change takes time. Religious beliefs can be a boundary or a barrier toward acceptance. But I know many
or they can be a blessing,
they
right?
can be a blessing.
So when you learn about the six genders in the Talmud, as a Jewish person, that would be very validating for you to know that the ancient rabbis actually saw that diversity in the human family before
Mm.
the scriptures were written down.
Yeah, that's just one amazing example. And I think other people find their way because they are part of affirming churches. And in their church, everyone is welcome, and that's everyone, right? And yet it can be challenging to, I think sometimes it depends on a person's ability to adapt in general. Some people are adapters. Some people are not. And so it doesn't mean that they won't. It just means they might need different pathways or time. And it's hard to be patient sometimes, but these relationships are so important that we can hopefully bring that patience. And there's a lot of other challenges, but also pathways toward acceptance. Each person's going to have their own timeline. Like we've been saying, roles and behaviors and expectations even may shift. Someone might want to do new things. They affirm their gender. And, my son, he really wanted to, have like more time with just him and his dad. And, this might be like traditional roles, but it felt right for him. And my husband too, I challenged him. Oh, I went a little too far. I challenged my husband to have the talk with our son, just like I, in a very gender normative way, had the talk with my daughters about, what puberty could be like, what dating could be like, what consent is, what is consent and how is consent important, birth control, all these important things that I thought, well, my husband could offer him his perspective as a cisgender male, and they could even share. Like my son says now, he has white male privilege, and he didn't know he would receive that, right? And he didn't know what to do with that. He wasn't socialized with that privilege. So these expectations for self and also interpersonal relationships can shift. This is another story about changing the narrative and shifting and going from one place to the other. This is written by MB, a grandparent of 2 trans grandchildren. She says, when I learned my grandchildren identified as transgender, I loved them as much as ever, but I lost my way in knowing how to accommodate this change. I made their being transgender the focus of our interactions. Each time I visited, I arrived at their home with a plan of questions to ask or something relevant to tell them. For example, I looked for positive stories about transgender adults or positive trends in legislation. And many months passed before I realized this was not what they most wanted. They wanted their grandma to just hang out with them, relax, be her natural goofy self, and listen deeply to whatever they wanted to share. And B says, I slowly returned to the spirit of play and attentiveness and ease in our connection. They were waiting. She really, she's a very inspiring woman. And now they hike and they do nature things and they go to plays, and gender's just part of the experience. But like I said at the beginning, it's just one small, not as interesting as so many other parts of them. This grandma really inspires me because she also wrote another part of the book about going on a pride ride. And this was another way that she was opened by her experience as the grandparent of transgender grandchildren. She and another grandma decided to get in their cars, and this was like maybe 2021. So not everyone was ready to gather in person, but Pride was certainly being celebrated in June, and they decided they could go in a car together, they'd wear their masks, and they would go around the Bay Area looking for signs of pride. They called it their Pride Ride. And how is that active allyship? Active allyship being that allyship, that ally that holds oneself accountable to being active and consistently supporting queer and trans people in our lives. So we don't just say we're allies and not do anything. So the Pride Ride, I felt like, was active allyship in that they were allying each other. These two grandmas were there together, giving each other the support so they could go looking for signs of positive love and acceptance and pride, right, in being LGBTQ. And they saw it all over the Bay Area. They drove, one lives in Marin and one lives in the East Bay, and they just drove around and they really supported each other and getting excited, which then they were able to bring that back to their family and also be politically active in looking for more ways to help build the protections for LGBTQ people. So this slide is a bit outdated. I meant to adjust it, but forgot. But the ACLU is tracking actually over 600 anti-LGBTQ bills in the US today. And the ACLU has a bill tracker, which you can look at regularly, and it's a little bit overwhelming. But the good thing is that many of these bills never make it to becoming law. And that's because of active allies and making sure that we let our leaders know where we're coming from, right? If trans people are only 1% of the population, is 1% of the population going to really change the whole narrative? Probably not. They need a lot of us to be actively looking toward our leaders to represent us all fairly and to center the people who are being most marginalized, right? And these marginalizations happen with school sports bans. That is an extremely hot topic, and I know it's out there. We have a wonderful group in the expanded Bay Area that is called Rainbow Families Action. And it's a great group for people who want to be actively engaged in making change. And one of the biggest focuses in Rainbow Family Action right now is protecting sports, protecting access to sports, and actually showing up for trans athletes in their communities. So Rainbow Families Action, it's a great resource to be knowing about, because if you know in your community that trans athletes are being excluded or are being bullied, Rainbow Families Action is trying to show up as allies and also working legislatively. So
Is
along
this
with
the group out of
equality.
San Diego?
No, that's Trans Family Support Services, I think you're thinking of,
Okay.
and we collaborate with them. We came out of Rainbow Families Bay Area, which was mostly in the East Bay, but all over the Bay, and there are
They
people
were a
from
part
out
of one
there.
of the advocacy days in Sacramento.
Yeah,
Very active
exactly.
group.
And we were there. When we were there, when I met you, I was there with Rainbow Families
That's
Action.
right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And and they're just they're a wonderfully growing group and super, super active. And we worked a lot with Equality California. So yes, we were at that action day and we'd love to collaborate. Of course, good thing is on the California school IDs now, the Trevor Project emergency crisis number hotline will be on the back of every student ID. That is a law that did get passed, that Governor Newsom did sign into law. So that's really great, right? Because that means that everyone can know a way to get help should they need it, and no one has to ask for it, it's just right there on the ID. And then, of course, straight allies can call that number too to find out, how can we help someone that might be in crisis? And these are just a few words that I have gathered over time from other people I've worked with. These three came through from my friend Jillian Celentano, who is a therapist in Connecticut. She's also a trans woman, a speaker, an educator, and we did a couple of presentations together. And she says these are her gems. This is a great phrase to have in our pockets, especially when someone is newly coming out to us or inviting us in. Wonderful phrase that someone could hear from their parent or grandparent. Everything I learn about you makes me love you more. Like, what a beautiful phrase. I'd love to hear that from someone, when I'm telling them about my life story. And how about this one? This one's a pretty good one. Jillian came through with, it is not the responsibility for your children or grandchildren to carry the weight of your fears. Whew. So let's get our support away from those folks and bring love and compassion and empathy and pride into the circle. And again, another really hits you in the heart. Do not become their first bully, become their first ally. I love those. So thank you, Jillian, for those. And here's just a few more that have come through from grandparents and from this talk, some of the information I've shared. Being trans is not a lifestyle choice. Please remember, it's just one more beautiful, normal variation of being human. And having the support of family is that number one way to prevent depression and suicidality among trans youth. And every child deserves to be loved and supported unconditionally.
That percentage that all it takes is one supportive adult in a LGBTQ kid's life to decrease suicidal ideation by 40% is so true, and we see it a lot in our work, and in a lot of even when we're visiting with kids and tabling at schools. It's just you can tell who has support and you can tell who's struggling because they don't have that support.
Yes, that's such an important story to tell. I always end my talks with this slide. We all have stories to tell, and in sharing those stories, we give voice to the voiceless. This is a great time to share stories. If you are watching this on a replay and you'd like to share your story, you can write it and share it with the center, with me. I love the idea of being able to, to hear people's stories. If you're a grandparent and you want to be part of a support group for grandparents, you can be in touch with me. All the groups that I run are listed on my website, which you can see at the bottom of the screen here. And the website name is the name of my first book. And here's where you get to see my son when he was really little. He was only 7 there, obviously a baseball player, not softball. He was one of 2 girls at the time in the league, and he was a heavy hitter in that league, and that T-ball is where he is there, not even before Little League. And he just had so much joy wearing that uniform and being part of that team. And I know that it would have been really, really sad if he was excluded from playing because he didn't have the M on his birth certificate at the time. So I really feel for trans athletes that are excluded, and also feel so good for everyone that gets to feel included. So first book, He's Always Been My Son. Second book, A Grand Love. And they're different. The first one really has a lot more of our own story, my story, raising my son, peppered with other people's impressions and their essays about witnessing Amaya's transition and growing up around him, or he's growing up around them. And then A Grand Love, as you've been exploring with me, is more grandparents and trans people talking about their grandparents with some guidance and writing from me. And so if you want to be in touch with me, these are great ways. And I would love to hear from you. I love to give complimentary call to anyone who feels like, they want to have resources, they want to maybe learn more about the work I do or the groups I offer. So please get in touch, and I would love to hear from you. And I'm just so appreciative of the center sharing this time with me and welcoming me in to share the book. And I wonder if anyone here has any questions or any thoughts that you want to share.
Go ahead and unmute yourself there, Christina.
I just wanted to say this is very much needed because me personally, I have my culture's a Latin culture, and I just would never think of talking about this to my grandparents. They're old generation that would never get it, and so there's just not even a thought of doing that. This gives people like me to maybe say, oh, maybe there's a possibility, you know.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that, Christina. I would love to hear more about that. And yeah, I think, right, like you're saying, cultural sensitivity is so key. And I do wonder though, right, if some of the stories on either the grandparent storytelling or the youth writing their stories might just help us think of our own way of bridging these conversations. I think that it would be really, well, it would just be interesting for me to hear how it goes if you do decide to do that. And also, I respect when people say, well, I can be who I am, but I don't know if I want to get too in depth with the conversations with grandparents. And sometimes they surprise us. There's a great story in the book by Dominic, who I'm pretty sure the title of it is These, excuse me for my language, I won't use the full word, These effing people. But she doesn't say effing, she just says the full word, And it was the grandma who was annoyed with the rest of the family for saying that Dom should not talk to his grandma. And she was like, what? Why would they be that way? Right. And so sometimes the grandparents do surprise us.
Yeah, I think we're putting a limitation on our whole life and their lives as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that.
I heard a lot of the Family Acceptance Project in your presentation, which is
Mhm.
great. We really support Dr. Caitlin Ryan's important work at UCSF in especially helping folks do their theological work themselves
Mhm.
separate so that they can present the acceptance that their child or grandchild needs to hear and experience. And they can talk to their rabbi, priest, or imam separately to do that work separately, um, if it is a religious or theological issue for them.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's more cultural, and sometimes it's really hard for us to separate what is cultural from the religious,
Mhm.
depending on where we grew up or what our socioeconomic status is, and a few other barriers as well. But it's that part's fascinating. Um, when the University of Utah used that same research, they called Lead with Love,
Mhm.
and had an acronym with the word lead, and now I can't remember it. But it's great because it reminds folks that you can be thinking and feeling whatever it is that you're feeling about the news that you're hearing about your loved one. But if you present acceptance and love, and many of the stories that are in the book do just that in some ways, and point out some ways that sometimes people think they're expressing love, but they really aren't. They're really being more selfish, trying to protect themselves
Mhm.
rather than their grandchild. That
Mhm.
if they can recognize that in the moment, then they'll be able to keep their young loved one from experiencing some of the symptoms that come from the non-acceptance in their life, and the higher suicidal ideation and the risky sex and the risky drug use, and so much that can get in the way when people don't have a safe place of acceptance and love. And that is so important. It feeds into all of the work that we do at our center. I know it does in so many others as well, because um, what Caitlin Ryan has done in providing cultural competent resources for folks of different cultures, including Latter-day Saints, Catholic, especially Hispanic Catholic, because it's a little different from other forms of Catholic because
Yes.
of the cultural aspect of Mexican Catholicism and that culture, even how it has differences from Central America and other places. um, by providing cultural appropriate resources for folks in differing faith traditions really has saved so many lives and so many relationships. So thank you for infusing your work with that great research. And I heard a lot of the Trevor Project and everybody
Yeah.
else in there too.
Well, because
Um,
we don't have to do this alone, right? There's so
that's right. There's
many
really great research
people.
out there, and we aren't on our
And,
own.
when people say, show me the research, I just say, it's not hard to find. It's really not. You just have
And
to,
it's not even hard to find on the trans youth in sports, which
no.
what surprised me,
Yeah.
finding that pointed out that when somebody's been on hormone replacement therapy for a year, they don't have no benefit or deficit in comparison to the people that they're playing
Mm,
um, in the sports with after they've done a year,
mm.
regardless of their height or their sex assigned at birth. 1 year
Yeah,
of
and I mean,
hormones
that's such
equalizes
a,
all of that.
yeah, perhaps, or perhaps they're born with certain acumen, such as, should we be saying that the 7'5" person, or however the tallest person is, shouldn't compete because they're way taller than everyone else, regardless of their gender? I looked this up because I was in a slight debate with someone, and this is getting off subject of my talk, but I think it's interesting just to talk about, which is I looked up, my friend said something about, she's not my friend, but anyway, six, I wouldn't want 6'5" this person she was naming, or 6'7" she was naming someone who she knows who is a cis male. I wouldn't want 6'5" cis male showing up at my daughter's team. And I looked up how many people are actually, what is the percentage of people who are 6'5" or more? And it's like less than 1% of humans. And so if we're talking about 1% of humans, and then if we talk about trans people who are 1%, so it's 1% of trans people who will be over. I mean, these numbers are just so tiny, tiny to think about, and the way that people are being marginalized based on these like fantastical ideas. And the fact is that championship sports are won by the people who can get there, period. And it's less about, it's true, we could talk about Title IX and how that's important, and it is. That doesn't mean that it needs to exclude trans people from being part of that, right? But that's a whole nother webinar, I think.
And should sports be competitive as much as they are,
Well, that's
instead
a
of
whole nother, or should it be
teaching
professional,
community
right?
building and
Right, right. There's so many ways that we could look at the way we play and what does that mean and what we're teaching when there's competition. People say, oh, it's healthy competition. Well, what if we taught cooperative skills through sports and how different our worlds could be, right? So, wow, we could go for a long time, but I think this is a good time to say thank you all for being part of this. And thank you to Solano Pride for having me. And I look forward to continued allyship, continued friendship, continued collaboration.
thank you so much. And let us know when we can be there more for you. It was great doing Advocacy Day with you and meeting you then
Yeah,
in
it really
person.
was.
And I think we met line just a week before.
Yes.
And so it was great to meet you and hear about your book, and now
Yeah,
being able to talk about it and share this with our whole community. We couldn't
sure
be more
thing.
pleased. So
And if
keep up the
folks
great
can't,
work.
if
Thank
you
you.
can't share, if you can't find the book at your local library or bookstores, you can get it from me online through my website and also at your favorite online retailers.
Can you put up your contact sheet one more time? Do you still have it in a place where you can
Yes.
share that?
Yeah, I sure do. Here we
And
go.
we should also say
Great.
that we have it in our library.
Oh,
It's there
yes.
for anybody to come by and read.
Thank you. So glad.
That's right.
Yes. So if you'd like to order a copy, just go to He's Always Been My Son, and they're on my author page. All right.
Thank you so much, Jana. What a
Thank
Thank you for
wonderful
your work.
evening.
Good evening.